Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and key global and regional developments that have an impact on India's rise. Viewers, in this episode, we are doing a deep dive into the phenomenon of global trade wars, retaliatory actions between different countries leading to major economic losses and damage, and also readjustments that different countries have to make as a result of these trade wars. This is what we're going to be discussing. And to take you through this, I have a very esteemed guest joining me in the studio with me. He has been India's lead negotiator at the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, and the World Trade Organization, WTO. He is India's former ambassador to France and Bahrain, and a scholar diplomat who currently is Dean of Strategic Initiatives at the O.P. Jindal Global University, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Ambassador Mohan Kumar, welcome to Indian Diplomacy. You've come back third time, and it's an honor to host you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaulia. It's a pleasure and honor to be back on your show. Thank you, and I want to congratulate you on how successful your show has been since I appeared last.
Thank you. So we are talking at a difficult time for the global economy, and I'd request you to first start by reflecting on the trade wars that have been unleashed as a result of the sweeping across the board tariffs announced by the United States government on all its partners across the world. And the question really, the big question is, are we in for some big global recession or downturn, or worse, a depression? Some of the Western investment banks are saying that the likelihood of a global recession is now up to 60%. It was earlier only 40%. So is the trade, the fallout of these trade wars going to be so bad that we may see something like the 1930s? And people are saying that, for example, the effective US tariff now has gone up to 24 to 25%, which is more than what we saw in 1930 when the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were announced, and which of course ultimately cascaded into the Great Depression. So big picture, are we in for a catastrophic collapse like in the 1930s? And if so, what would be the outcome?
So thank you very much for that question, which I think is a very, very important question on the minds of everyone. It is my view that this is an extremely important action taken by the Trump administration. I tend to characterize it as a fundamental assault on the bedrock of the GATT WTO system, which is the Article 1 of GATT, which is the MFN, Most Favored Nation Tariff. Your viewers will know what MFN stands for. Effectively, the United States is serving notice that we are withdrawing from the WTO system. There is no question about it. That's point number one. Point number two, it introduces tremendous uncertainty in an already geopolitical uncertain world. So the trade aspect has become much more uncertain as a result of the announcement of Trump tariffs. It also introduces a certain degree of complexity, because how you are going to negotiate with 60 odd countries, the tariffs are different for 60 odd countries. Each country has about 10,000 tariff lines according to the HS 8-digit system of the World Customs Organization. So it becomes very, very complex. As for your important question as to whether there will be a recession, I think I would rule out a depression, but I would not rule out a recession. A global recession is possible. Having said that, I also don't want to exaggerate the impact. It'll surprise your viewers to know that the global share of imports by United States into the market is only 13%. The other way of putting it is 87% of global trade is actually immune so far from the Trump tariffs. So I would say a recession, yes, depression, no.
Yeah, and Ambassador Kumar, we also hear that services have not yet been affected, and it's mainly goods trade that is on the line. which Trump is taking aim at. So, and services comprise a large chunk of the global economy, right? So, to some extent, I suppose we will be shielded because of that reason as well. And there's also domestic consumption in many countries that is not dependent on exports and imports so much, isn't it?
You're absolutely spot on. This concerns only merchandise trade in goods. So services roughly constitute 60 to 65% of the global economy. So you're right, that also is insulated for the time being. So I would not exaggerate the impact, but having said that, I think the most important impact is likely to be a serious global disruption of supply chains. And that is what we will talk about a little later, maybe on your show. But I think the complexity, the uncertainty introduced, the disruption introduced comes at a bad time for the world.
Right. Ambassador Kumar, talking of the volatility, now obviously 60 countries approximately have been hammered with the tariffs, but there's a differential rates that President Trump has announced against various countries. Some have quote unquote gotten off lightly, some have been really severely punished. So in that sense, you also see a varied set of reactions and responses also. There are, the Chinese have been obviously, a great power, peer competitor of the US. It's a prestige on the line, and they have hit back with commensurate retaliatory tariffs. The others are somewhere in the middle. There are some who are criticizing it but have not yet retaliated. Then we have countries like Mexico, interestingly, and India, which want to tactfully navigate this tricky situation. So what does that tell you about dependencies and strategies of different players now responding to the US actions? Not everybody is interested in a trade war, it seems.
It's very interesting you raised that point, and you're quite right. China had to retaliate because for a country like China, saving face is very important. The Communist Party of China, and they cannot just keep quiet when the United States, for them, according to their perception, acts like a bully. So China has retaliated, and you're quite right, the reaction from EU has taken me a little bit by surprise. I thought they will retaliate, and maybe they will, but to date, they have chosen not to retaliate, and that's very interesting. Speaking for India, I think the Indian reaction has been correct from my perspective. The American officials have made it clear that these tariffs are reversible. And I think India should do everything in its power to negotiate with the United States to bring these tariffs down to the pre-Trumpian tariff announcement level, and that is what I think we are trying to do. It is in India's interest to negotiate with the US and try to get these tariffs down as much as possible.
Yeah, and so you're saying this is like a opening salvo in what is going to be an extended bargaining game, and that this is not final, and obviously, like you said, they're reversible. So concessions as well as diplomatic engagement will probably lower some of the impact on various countries.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the statements coming out of the US, especially the Treasury Secretary, for example, says, please consider this as a cap and please negotiate. In fact, one of them has said, don't be the last country to negotiate. Negotiate with us so that you can then get a reduction of these tariffs. What I expect, Professor Chaulia, is that the 10% which he has imposed on all countries will probably remain for a while. And the other additional component, if you like, which has been imposed on countries like India, China, EU, that is, I think, a matter for negotiation. And that is why I think India has been right not to be jingoistic, not to retaliate, but to try and see whether we can negotiate. If the negotiations fail, that's a different scenario. But I think we should do everything in our power to negotiate with US. We have a strategic partnership. We have a consequential partnership with US. I think we should do everything to negotiate away these tariffs.
Right. And Ambassador Kumar, this is also a very delicate moment for a lot of other US partners and allies, especially in Asia. I mean, if you look at the tariff list, some of the worst affected are actually close strategic partners of the US. I mean, we have Japan, we have South Korea, which are allies. and then Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines. Now that region, the traditional US view had been to try and entice them away from becoming part of the Chinese Sinocentric economic order, and to take them away and to redirect their supply chains. But now the effect of this, the knock-on effect of this, could very well be that already some of the ASEAN countries have now inched closer to China. And in fact, President Trump was asked by a reporter, do you think that you will actually lose allies and friends as a result of this? And he said, no, actually it will become stronger, because now they know that we are dealing with a stronger hand with them and all that. So, and he said there's only going to be little disturbance and not a big, kerfuffle. So here, what do you think is the supply chain impact? Everyone is talking about how the effect of the trade wars is going to redirect supply chains. And could this be advantage China to the point that they will now integrate a lot of the affected countries into their orbit by offering them concessions and market access? Because they also, it's a big market, right? 1.4 billion people, and it's a large economy. So could this have that kind of a diversionary effect?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question as well. And I think one has to carefully look at the impact as this whole event plays itself out. But it's important to understand why President Trump has done what he has done. His major obsession seems to be that the American share in global manufacturing is only 16%, whereas the Chinese share in global manufacturing is 32%. He is addressing that. He is addressing the $1 trillion trade deficit. These are the two things that he wants to address in the first place. Now, as to your question, the master class in strategic hedging has been given by Japan and South Korea. 2 days before the announcement of the Trumpian tariffs, the trade ministers of Japan, South Korea, and China met in Seoul. They were meeting after 5 years. This is the so-called trilateral summit arrangement. And they have said we must expedite a move towards the free trade agreement, which has been hanging fire between these three countries. And 3 days after the Trumpian announcement, you have the Japanese and the South Korean foreign minister meeting with Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State, in Brussels. And they are talking about security architecture in the Indo-Pacific. The US seems to have said we have an ironclad commitment towards the treaty alliance between the US, South Korea, US, Japan. So it's very interesting for me that what you are saying in terms of trade and economics can happen. There may be a tilt towards China, and these countries will nevertheless continue to rely on the security umbrella of the US. So you will find this disconnect becoming more and more stark. Countries like Japan and South Korea will continue to have relations with China and even accelerate their trade ties, and they will also try and make sure that the security umbrella remains. The target against Vietnam is basically to target China plus one strategy. That should be of some concern for India also, because in terms of impact on India, Foxconn, for example, has started assembling Apple iPhones in India. And if the China plus one strategy is going to be attacked by the Trumpian tariffs, then I think these countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, but particularly Vietnam and Cambodia. China is routing its investment to America through Vietnam and Cambodia. And that is why President Trump is targeting countries like Vietnam and Cambodia. So it's an interesting phenomenon that will play itself out in the next few days and months.
Ambassador Kumar, there's also, now let's come to India in particular and our bilateral approach to trying to resolve this, escalating trade crisis with the US. Whatever the percentage, tariffs that they have announced, we will obviously try to bring them down, and there will be, a continuous negotiation on this matter. But what is the loss that we are likely to face overall? People are all saying that this is actually not only a death knell to the liberal international order, but also especially a death blow to developing countries in general, because when you say reciprocal, it does not accept the differences in development levels, right? I mean, I may be rich and you're poor, my per capita income may be 20 times more than yours, but both of us have to have the same levels of tariff. That is Trump's argument, right? So as a developing country with a lot of vulnerabilities also, and you have been our negotiator on this matter, we've had a lot of north-south tussles on these matters, both at the multilateral and bilateral level. What do you think is the adverse impact we are likely to face, and how can we weather it? And there's also, of course, a silver lining. Some people are saying that because if Vietnam and Bangladesh have a higher rate of tariffs, then, for example, our textiles, which we are competing with them, will have a better chance in the US market and all that. So let's talk about the pros and cons from an Indian point of view of this whole trade war.
Thank you, and I think that's extremely important. I want to first make a statement on GSP, India's developing country status. The fact of the matter is the GSP benefit has been withdrawn from India by both EU and the US. So India does not get GSP status now from its main trading partners. Second, as far as India is concerned, some trade policy reform is necessary. Any well-wisher of India will say that we do have high tariffs in some sectors, not all sectors, but some sectors, and maybe we should use this as an opportunity to carry out trade policy reform. What do I mean by that? First, bring down tariffs in some selected items. The White House fact sheet talks of a tariff of 50% on apples. Do you really think that is something we can do something about? So tariffs in some areas can be brought down so that Indian industry is more open to competition. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is non-tariff barriers must also be handled. The White House fact sheet talks of certain quality control requirements and certification requirements that India has put in place for chemicals, for telecom, and for medical devices. I think India will be well advised to relook at these non-tariff barriers and try and see if we can remove them, because according to the US, this will lead to US exports of $6 billion, which may actually help reduce the trade deficit. So all in all, I see that you have to do a sector-wise analysis of India. Shrimps, gems and jewelry, and textiles, garments. So my sense is shrimps and gems and jewelry are the most important. I see these sectors taking a hit, and therefore India must negotiate hard with the United States to try and tell them that these two sectors are important for India and can we reduce the tariffs. On textiles and garments, you are absolutely right. India has stopped competing with China. We compete with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. And as you will notice, all these countries are actually subject to more tariffs than India. So we may be fine at the end of the day, but I think garments and textiles, we will be able to cope. On the whole, the losses for India have been estimated, and it's just a ballpark estimate at this stage. They have been estimated at $3 billion or 0.1 to 0.2% of GDP. I will convey to you that I think we can live with it at the end of the day.
Yeah, the US relationship is so big that we'll have to live with it to some extent. But Ambassador Kumar, the prospect of a bilateral trade agreement or a deal, because for Trump, it's all art of the deal, isn't it, with each country. What is the prospect of that kind of a, some kind of a settlement so that for the next 4 years, no more tariff barriers and no more shocks come our way? Can we just do a kind of a package settlement with them? And what is the prospect of that? Because we do a lot of FTA type, preferential trade agreements and negotiations with so many countries. But with the US in particular, what do you think are the prospects of that kind of a thing so that we are, settled and no more dust-ups?
So just for the record, this is not a free trade agreement. A free trade agreement with the US will take years. It has to pass through Congress, and there are all sorts of complications. This is not an FTA. It is a bilateral trade agreement, and we are not looking for this to be approved by the WTO or by any other institution. A limited bilateral trade agreement, I believe, is a strong possibility. My understanding is we will be able to have a bilateral trade agreement with the United States in the next few months. And as you rightly say, if we conclude that agreement, then we will have a reasonable degree of assurance that tariffs will then be mutually agreeable and it will not change for the remainder of the period of President Trump.
Yeah, and presumably, Ambassador Kumar, the fact that we have a comprehensive global strategic partnership with the US, Prime Minister Modi has a personal, strong chemistry and camaraderie with President Trump. All these factors should at some point come into the play, isn't it? I mean, what I mean is non-economic calculations also. And I'm sure we're going to try and impress upon them that the strategic partnership should not go down because of this trade war, isn't it? And that's something much bigger, and we have to preserve it at all costs. So are you optimistic that we can work it out with them?
Yes, I am cautiously optimistic. My sense as an ex-diplomat tells me that officials are negotiating hard, and we expect President Trump to come to India for the Quad summit meeting, at which point you may see a bilateral trade agreement being signed with President Trump and Prime Minister Modi standing. The commerce ministers may sign it, and that is the kind of timeline that I am talking about. And I think there are enough voices, enough people in the US who think that this is the most consequential partnership between US and India. So I do expect this bilateral trade agreement to succeed in the next few months.
Right. Last word, Ambassador Kumar, what kind of world is this? I mean, President Trump announced that it is a liberation day for American workers and companies. The Economist magazine called it Ruination Day. And then my own coinage is illiberal day, because this is the end seemingly of the liberal international order itself, where there is no longer any kind of systematic understanding among countries based on comparative advantages, and that I focus on one thing and you focus on that. Now the attempt to bring the so-called onshoring as opposed to offshoring and friendshoring, that seems a reversal of this whole globalization era itself. So again, going to end with the big picture, what kind of world are we entering in, where there is more economic nationalism, more competition, fierce competition, conflict, and it seems a kind of like a war of all against all, as Thomas Hobbes used to say, at least in the economic realm. So in that sense, it looks like a very disjointed and a disorderly kind of a world with no rules and no institutions to fall back on. So you said uncertainty, volatility. How would you like to characterize this current era that we are entering with the trade wars in the backdrop?
So I see it as the pinnacle of the geopoliticization of trade, or the weaponization of trade. And this has been going on for a while, even before President Trump. But obviously, President Trump has taken it to the next level. I see the danger of a fragmentation of the multilateral trading system. I also see a certain attempt at reworking the supply chains. And we may be entering into an era where the global supply chains will be disrupted and new resilient supply chains are being put in place, and attempts, as you said, at reshoring. As I said, I go back to the original point I made. President Trump does not want China to overtake United States when it comes to share of manufacturing output and share of global GDP. On share of global GDP, China is catching up with the US. US is still 26%, but China is catching up at 19%. The global share of manufacturing is a different story, as I said, with 32% for China and 16% for US. Mr. President Trump is trying to reverse it. As I said, whether he succeeds or not, only time will tell.
Right. So, Ambassador Kumar, the gist of this conversation, as I see it, is we are in a very fragile moment, and things could very well unravel and fall apart, but we may avoid a depression. But there are serious consequences to what is going on, and India is affected, so is everybody else, and there's a kind of a scramble on how to pursue. Each country will look for its own national interests first, and there is no kind of a group response that we are seeing. It's all going to be variegated based on individual equations with the US and what we have to gain and lose. And in terms of the larger picture, there is going to be more anarchy, more chaos, and less order, and which means that we have to be prepared, I think psychologically, not to take anything for granted, isn't it? I mean, it's like, even partnerships now have a sharper edge.
I think we are entering a period of geopolitical turbulence which is extending to the area of trade, commerce, investment, intellectual property rights. You are right. You will need to be very, very nimble in order to navigate this extremely turbulent world.
So, viewers, the sum of this, very, very technically dense but important discussion with Ambassador Mohan Kumar is that we have entered a new era, and this is the post-liberal or the illiberal era, where there is no such thing as strategic generosity by big powers on the basis of which they will build their global influence. It's all about narrower and more transactional calculations. So, in a way, India and everybody else is also compelled to adjust to this and think about their core national interests rather than the universal good. So, it's not great news if you are a believer in global governance, if you are a believer in rules-based order and liberal international order, it's not great news. But then, world history does not remain static, and the onset of the trade wars is probably an indication of the beginning of a new era. And what we want to call it, I will leave it to all of you to think about. But let me thank Ambassador Mohan Kumar for filling us in with so much dense details and insights. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaulia.
Viewers, let's all pay attention to the trade wars that are underway, and we cannot ignore them because it is going to directly affect our pocketbook. And of course, India as a country, our national interests, our rise in the world is at stake. And if we are able to skillfully maneuver through this difficult period, we can emerge as winners. We know what are the opportunities contained in the crisis also. And if we are able to get our domestic regulatory structure in order and are able to attract a lot of deflected manufacturing from other rival countries, maybe we will end up as net gainers of this trade war. But it's a challenging time for Indian diplomacy, and we as a people of India must stand firmly behind the government as it goes forward in dealing with this very, very anarchic global situation. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.